There comes a moment in one's awakening when love, once so simple, becomes an unsolvable riddle. The awakened soul begins to feel an invisible distance, not because others are unworthy, but because the heart now beats to a rhythm few can hear. You see, once you've glimpsed the profound stillness behind existence, ordinary affection begins to tremble beneath the weight of that vast awareness. What once felt intimate now feels temporary, fragile, like waves trying to hold the ocean that created them. Alan once often said that awakening is like laughing at the cosmic joke. You realize there was never anyone to love or to be loved, only love itself playing every role. And yet, this realization is both liberating and lonely. When you awaken, you no longer seek someone to complete you, because you see that you are never incomplete. But in that realization lies a quiet sorrow, the understanding that most of the world still lives in the dream of separation, and few are ready to share the silence that follows awakening. To love deeply after awakening requires a paradox. To hold the world in your arms while knowing it is an illusion. The awakened heart longs not for romance, but for resonance. It doesn't seek possession, only reflection. And in a world obsessed with stories of me and you, such love seems impossible. That's why many awakened souls drift, not out of pride or detachment, but because their hearts can no longer pretend. They crave a love that doesn't demand, that doesn't fear, that doesn't end. Perhaps that's the secret what's tried to whisper beneath his laughter, that the more conscious you become, the harder it is to find someone who truly sees you. Not because love has vanished, but because it has become too vast to fit within a single person. And so the awakened walk alone, not in sadness, but in reverence for a love that transcends all boundaries. Still, the paradox remains. The more you dissolve into unity, the more difficult it becomes to share it with another. Because how can you give love when you've realized there is no other left to receive it? Love, in its purest form, is not something we find, but something we remember. Yet, for those who have awakened, this remembrance comes with an ache. Alan Watts would often say that the moment you realize the illusion of the separate self, you also realize that every attempt to own love is a contradiction. The awakened being no longer seeks love as a transaction, but as a state of being, something that flows through them, not toward them. And that's where the first fracture appears. Because most people love to get, not to be. The awakened soul, however, loves without condition, and that kind of love can feel almost alien in a world still chasing validation. When consciousness expands, the veil of need falls away. The awakened one no longer desires love to fill a void, because the void itself has become sacred. They've touched the vastness of what's called the dance of existence, where everything and everyone are expressions of the same divine play. But how can you dance with someone who still believes the music belongs to them? The awakened realize that love is not two souls meeting halfway. It's the universe recognizing itself in another form. To those still dreaming, this sounds poetic. To those awake, it is both truth and tragedy. This realization transforms the very nature of intimacy. The awakened no longer seek comfort in attachment, but beauty in freedom. They understand that trying to hold someone forever is like trying to capture the wind. They don't want to own, they want to witness. Yet, in a world that confuses attachment with affection, such detachment feels cold. Partners may mistake it for indifference, unaware that it is the highest form of love, a love that asks for nothing in return. The awakened don't pull away out of rejection, but out of reverence for the sacred autonomy of the other. What's compared this to the ocean and the wave? The wave forgets that it is the ocean, and so it fears disappearing. But the awakened no longer fear that merging. They embrace it. Love, for them, is not an exchange between two entities, but a recognition that there were never two to begin with. It's a dissolution, the kind that scares those who still crave control. To love like that is to die in every moment and be reborn without boundaries. And few can bear that level of surrender. So the awakened drift, not because they wish to escape connection, but because they can no longer play the old game. They cannot pretend that love is about finding someone when they've seen that everyone is a mirror. Every soul they meet reflects the same divine consciousness, yet few mirrors are clear enough to reflect it back. And so they walk with quiet eyes and open hearts, loving the world entirely, yet belonging nowhere within it. As the awakened continue to live among the unawakened, they encounter a paradox that Alan Watts described as the loneliness of unity. They see the oneness in all things, yet that very realization isolates them from the rhythm of ordinary human desire. The world around them still burns for passion, drama, and attachment, while they have glimpsed a love that exists beyond all forms. They can no longer unsee the truth that every pursuit of romantic love is a disguised search for the self. Once that truth dawns, the chase ends, and with it, much of what once made human connection feel exciting. But this is not a rejection of love. It is love, evolving. The awakened begin to see that the ache they feel is not the absence of love, but the absence of illusion. Watts would say that the awakened stop seeking the light because they realize they are the light. Yet, in a world still lost in its shadows, that realization can feel unbearably lonely. It's not that they can't love. It's that their love has become too vast to fit inside the narrow shapes the world offers. They love through silence, through presence, through the space between words. They no longer need to say, "I love you," because the very act of being radiates it. And yet, this kind of love rarely survives the weight of human expectation. People want promises, definitions, boundaries. They want to know what they mean to you, where they stand, and what tomorrow looks like. But the awakened live in the eternal present, the now that what's so beautifully called the only real moment. For them, love is not about tomorrow. It is about this breath, this gaze, this fleeting heartbeat. When they say, "I love you," it means, "I see God in you, right now," and that is enough. But to the unawakened, that can feel like uncertainty. This difference creates a chasm between worlds. The awakened try to bridge it, to meet others where they are, but soon realize that truth cannot be forced upon those still dreaming. They can offer presence, compassion, and depth, but they cannot make someone see. Love, to them, is not a contract, but a current, one that moves freely, never owned. And when others try to capture it, to define it, it slips away, not out of cruelty, but because it cannot survive confinement. In the end, the awakened understand what's meant when he said, "When you realize that you are that which you seek, the seeking ends." They stop searching for the one, because they have found the many reflections of the same divine energy in every face, every moment. Their journey is no longer about finding someone to love, but learning to love without someone. It is both the greatest liberation and the most exquisite ache, to walk the earth filled with infinite love, yet unable to pour it into a single heart that truly understands. Alan Watts often spoke about the illusion of control, how humans cling to love as if it were something to be managed, protected, or owned. The awakened, however, see that love is not a possession, but a movement. It is like the wind. You cannot grasp it without losing it. When consciousness expands, control dissolves, and love transforms from a grasping into a giving. But this frightens those still attached to certainty. They mistake freedom for detachment and surrender for weakness. They cannot understand how one can love deeply and yet be willing to let go completely. The awakened live in that paradox, loving without holding, giving without expecting, staying without needing to belong. As their awareness deepens, they begin to see love as a reflection of consciousness itself, a dance of energies rather than a meeting of personalities. To them, relationships are no longer about fulfillment, but about growth. Every encounter becomes a mirror through which the universe learns about itself. Watts described this beautifully. You do not look out from your eyes, you look out through them. In that realization, every lover becomes a gateway to the divine, a reminder that the entire cosmos is in conversation with itself. But when one partner has seen this truth and the other has not, the connection begins to tremble beneath the weight of misunderstanding. The awakened can no longer tolerate love born from fear. They no longer crave validation or chase after emotional security. Instead, They find beauty in uncertainty, in the constant dying and rebirthing of connection. This confuses others because they expect consistency, a promise that love will look the same tomorrow as it does today. But to the awakened, change is sacred. To freeze love in time would be to kill it. And so, they allow it to breathe, to flow, to evolve, even if that means watching it fade. Their love is not a cage but a sky, infinite and untamed. This is why the awakened often seems solitary, even when surrounded by others. They no longer relate to love as a quest for completion, but as a celebration of wholeness. They are not searching for someone to fill them, because they have already merged with the very essence of existence. Yet, paradoxically, this fullness isolates them. When you no longer need, few can meet you in that space. People are drawn to their peace, their calm, their depth, but when they realize that such love demands the death of ego, they retreat. The awakened, then, remain as silent witnesses, loving quietly, knowing that the world is not yet ready to love in this way. And still, they do not close their hearts. Because to be awakened is to know that love cannot truly be lost. Even when it doesn't return, it still radiates through the fabric of being. Watts would say that love is like the light of the sun. It doesn't choose where to shine, it simply does. The awakened understand this, and so they keep loving, even without reason, even without reciprocation. They love not because someone deserves it, but because it is their nature to do so. In time, the awakened learn to find beauty in solitude, not the loneliness of absence, but the serenity of presence. They begin to see that being alone is not a punishment, but a purification, a sacred return to what is real. Alan Watts often said that solitude is the space where the soul speaks in its native tongue. It's where the awakened discover that love doesn't disappear in the absence of another. It expands. They start to see love not as a bridge between two people, but as an ocean that already connects everything. This realization transforms solitude into communion, a dialogue with the divine that no human relationship could ever replicate. But this truth is difficult to explain to those who still equate love with togetherness. The unawakened see solitude as emptiness. The awakened see it as fullness. While one fears silence, the other rests in it. Watts believe that silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of everything unspoken. In that silence, the awakened hear the pulse of the universe. And it is there that they realize love is not found through another person. It is found through awareness itself. To awaken is to see that every heartbeat, every breath, every ripple of emotion is love in motion. And yet, even with this understanding, the human heart still longs to share. The awakened are not immune to desire. They have simply seen through it. They may crave connection, but now they crave something far deeper, a meeting of souls beyond words and forms. They want to be understood not through conversation, but through presence. To look into another's eyes and see the same infinite stillness looking back. But such encounters are rare, for they require both to have surrendered the illusion of separation. Until then, the awakened must walk through a world that does not speak their language. This path teaches them compassion. Instead of judging others for their attachments, they begin to see the innocence behind them. The unawakened cling because they fear being alone, unaware that they are never truly alone. The awakened understand this fear, for they once lived it. But now, their compassion flows effortlessly. They do not try to fix, to teach, or to convince. They simply are, radiating the peace that comes from knowing there is nothing to attain. Their love becomes quiet, like the air, unseen, but essential. And so, the awakened continue their journey, not searching for love, but embodying it. They realize that to be love itself is the highest romance the soul can experience. It is not the ecstasy of union nor the ache of loss, but the steady flame of awareness that burns through all illusions. They have discovered what most spend lifetimes chasing. That love was never something to find. It was what they were all along. At this stage of awakening, love becomes something deeper than emotion. It becomes perception itself. Alan Watts often said that To love is to recognize yourself in another. And when that recognition becomes total, the illusion of the other dissolves completely. The awakened being looks upon every person and every experience as a reflection of their own infinite nature. But this recognition, while divine, can be overwhelming. It blurs the line between intimacy and unity until even the concept of relationship begins to dissolve. How do you love one person when you can no longer deny that all are one? The heart becomes a vast landscape, boundless, luminous, but almost impossible to share. Those still asleep in the dream of separation often misinterpret this as emotional distance. They expect the awakened to engage in love the way they once did, with passion, possession, and promise. But the awakened have seen that love does not need promises. It only needs presence. They no longer cling to permanence, because they have accepted the truth that all things flow. What's compared this to music? The beauty is not in reaching the end of the song, but in dancing through every note as it unfolds. To the awakened, love is that dance, ephemeral, alive, and endlessly changing. Trying to make it last forever would be like trying to trap music in a cage. This is where many awakened hearts find themselves misunderstood. They still feel deeply, perhaps more deeply than ever before, but they express it differently. They do not rush, they do not demand, they do not beg for assurance. Their love is quiet, grounded, and infinitely patient. They love without agenda, without fear of loss. But this serenity can unsettle those who still equate intensity with care. The awakened no longer burn for love, they glow with it. And in a world addicted to drama, calmness can be mistaken for absence. Yet, the awakened are not immune to longing. There is still a human within the divine, a heart that yearns to be met in that same awareness. They may find brief reflections of it in others, fleeting moments when the illusion fades and two beings share one consciousness. But these moments are rare, and the awakened learn not to chase them. They understand that true love cannot be sought or secured. It simply arises when two souls are equally free. Until then, they live in surrender, loving fully, even when alone. And in that surrender, a new kind of peace emerges. The awakened no longer suffer from the absence of love, because they have become love itself. Their fulfillment is not dependent on the presence of another, but on the alignment with truth. This doesn't mean they reject human connection. It means they no longer cling to it as a source of identity. Their relationships become sacred play, moments where the universe dances with itself, neither beginning nor ending, only being. There comes a point when the awakened stop searching altogether. They no longer look for the one, because they realize that love cannot be confined to one form. Alan Watts would call this the great relief of surrender. In that state, everything becomes an expression of love. The breeze through the trees, the laughter of a stranger, the quiet hum of existence itself. The awakened learn that love was never something to be found in another person. It was the essence behind every experience they ever had. When that understanding settles, loneliness begins to dissolve, replaced by awe. Still, this realization doesn't erase the tenderness of being human. The awakened continue to feel, to care, to weep, but now these emotions flow through them without resistance. They no longer cling to them as personal. Joy and sorrow become equal notes in the same divine melody. They may fall in love again, but their love is now unconditional. Not because they force it to be, but because they see the futility of trying to own what belongs to eternity. They love freely, knowing that even loss is part of love's design. What's often said that awakening is like watching yourself watch the world. You realize that everything is happening through you, not to you. The awakened lover experiences this constantly. They see love as energy moving through the fabric of consciousness, expressing itself in countless forms. To try to possess it would be like trying to steal sunlight. So they allow love to move, to enter, to leave, to return in unexpected ways. Their fulfillment no longer depends on continuity, but on awareness. Every encounter becomes holy because every encounter reveals another face of the same truth. This state of being can be both blissful and isolating. To see through the illusion of separation means you can no longer participate in it wholeheartedly. The awakened cannot pretend to be half of a whole when they've seen they were always the whole itself. This makes relationships difficult, not because they reject love, but because they can no longer engage in its illusions. They can no longer say, "You complete me," when they know completion was never missing. For those still seeking, this truth feels unreachable. For the awakened, it is simply peace. And so they walk a delicate path between humanity and divinity, between attachment and freedom. Their love is not a story, not a promise, not a need. It is an endless act of giving, a quiet recognition that everything is already perfect, even in its imperfection. They no longer need to be loved back to feel whole, because they have seen that love itself, in its pure, unfiltered essence, was never about two people at all. It was always the universe remembering its own beauty through the eyes of the awakened. When Alan Watts spoke about awakening, he often described it as the collapse of boundaries between the observer and the observed. This collapse changes everything, especially love. Once you've realized that the lover, the beloved, and the act of loving are one and the same, the very structure of human connection is rewritten. The awakened can no longer play the game of possession, nor can they participate in the rituals of emotional dependency that society calls love. To them, love has become pure seeing, a recognition of divinity in every form. And yet, because few people perceive the world in this way, the awakened often find themselves standing at the edge of intimacy, unable to step fully in, unable to walk fully away. This paradox becomes their teacher. Through it, they learn that love without attachment is not cold. It is clear. It doesn't bind, it blesses. The awakened give love the way the sky gives sunlight, effortlessly, without preference, without demand. But this purity of love is unbearable to those who still believe in separation. The unawakened crave ownership because it offers safety, while the awakened crave openness because it offers truth. These two desires rarely coexist. And so, the awakened walk through relationships like travelers through dreams, deeply present, but always aware that the dream may end at any moment. Watts would often laugh when people asked him about spiritual relationships. He'd say, "There's no such thing as a spiritual relationship. There's only spirit relating." This insight captures the heart of the awakened experience. To them, love is not a noun, not a possession, but a verb, a continuous unfolding, a divine movement. When they love, they don't try to define it or hold it still. They simply participate in its flow, trusting that what belongs will remain, and what must go will go. This fluidity scares most people who equate love with permanence. But the awakened know that permanence is an illusion, and that the beauty of love lies in its impermanence. As their awareness deepens, the awakened begin to see love everywhere, in every interaction, every silence, every ending. They stop dividing experiences into romantic and spiritual, because to them, all love is spiritual. They can feel tenderness for a stranger, devotion for a tree, and reverence for the vast stillness that holds all things together. This expansion of love's scope makes it harder for them to confine it to one person. And yet, when they do fall in love, it is unlike anything ordinary, because they love not as a self seeking another, but as consciousness embracing itself. But even this kind of love has its ache. For when everything becomes sacred, nothing can be possessed. The awakened must face the grief of freedom, the pain of loving without clinging, of caring without claiming. They understand that true love is not about merging with another being, but about dissolving into the totality of existence itself. And though this understanding brings peace, it also carries a subtle melancholy, the longing for a connection that can never be confined to form, a longing that belongs to the soul itself. Eventually, the awakened stop trying to explain their love to the world. They realize that words cannot contain what they feel. Love, as Watts would remind them, is not an idea to be defined. It is an experience to be lived. And so, they live it quietly, They no longer argue about what love should be, or who deserves it, or how it should last. They simply become love, allowing it to move through their existence like breath. Every moment becomes an act of communion, not with another person, but with the whole of life itself. This does not mean they stop desiring connection. It means their desire has evolved into something more refined, a yearning not for attachment, but for mutual awareness. They no longer want a partner to complete them, but a companion who can share in the stillness. Someone who understands that love is not about holding hands through eternity, but about recognizing eternity in every instant. This kind of union does not feed on possession or fear. It grows in freedom. It is rare, but when it happens, it feels like two flames merging into one light, distinct yet inseparable. The awakened also learn that love's purpose is not to satisfy, but to awaken. Every heartbreak, every disappointment becomes a mirror reflecting their own depth. What's often said, you cannot be alive without being vulnerable. The awakened embrace that vulnerability as sacred. They no longer guard their hearts because they know there is nothing to lose. Love, to them, is not about avoiding pain. It is about being open enough to experience all of it, the joy, the sorrow, the silence, the surrender. In that openness, they find a kind of peace that no relationship could ever give or take away. In time, they realize that love was never meant to be understood. It was meant to dissolve the one who tries to understand. That is the ultimate secret. Love does not exist for the awakened. They exist as love. Every act of kindness, every breath of compassion, every tear of gratitude becomes an expression of the divine recognizing itself. They have transcended the need for love, and yet become the very essence of it. The search ends where love no longer needs a name. And so, the awakened do not fail to find love. They simply find too much of it. It surrounds them, fills them, flows through them, until there is no longer a them to receive it. What once seemed like isolation is revealed as immersion. What once felt like loss becomes liberation. Alan Watts would smile at this paradox, reminding us that awakening is not the end of love, but its beginning, the moment we finally remember that love was never meant to be found, only remembered. In the deep silence that follows awakening, love transforms into something almost nameless. It no longer belongs to romance, nor friendship, nor longing. It becomes the pure vibration of existence itself. The awakened begin to see that every heartbeat, every sigh, every flicker of light in the eyes of another being is love expressing itself through form. Alan Watts often described this as the play of the divine, where each soul is both actor and audience in the grand theater of consciousness. Once you see this, it becomes impossible to limit love to a single story. Love is the story, the stage, and the stillness between every word. This understanding brings immense peace, but also an unfamiliar tenderness. The awakened begin to feel love not as passion, but as presence, not as excitement, but as reverence. Every encounter, whether brief or enduring, becomes sacred. The person who passes you on the street, the stranger who meets your eyes for half a second, these are no longer random events. They are reflections of the eternal meeting itself. The awakened walk through the world knowing that everything they touch, every soul they encounter, is another expression of the infinite they've remembered. But this awareness does not erase human longing. It deepens it. For even though they know love cannot be possessed, the awakened still ache for communion in the physical realm. They yearn to share the unspoken truth with someone who can meet them there, in the silence behind the words, in the stillness beyond desire. They want to experience the infinite through the finite, to touch eternity with human hands. This longing is not weakness. It is the echo of the divine seeking to know itself more deeply. What's often said that life is a game of hide and seek between the self and itself. The awakened understand this now. They see love as the self revealing itself to itself through countless disguises. Every smile, every heartbreak, every fleeting moment of recognition. And even though they cannot hold on to it, they no longer try. They have learned that love's beauty lies in its impermanence. To cling would be to kill it. To let go is to keep it alive. So they live in a gentle paradox, overflowing with love, yet belonging to no one. To most, this sounds like loneliness. But for the awakened, it is home. They have discovered a love that needs no witness, no validation, no end. It is the love that moves the stars, that breathes through the trees, that sings in the silence between heartbeats. It is what they are, what we all are, once the dream of separation finally fades. As the journey deepens, the awakened no longer ask, "Why can't I find love?" They understand now that love was never lost, only misunderstood. The question dissolves into realization. What's would say that enlightenment is not about gaining something new, but seeing what was always there. The awakened stop chasing love because they finally recognize that every attempt to find it outside was only a reflection of the love within. And in that moment of clarity, their search becomes surrender. They start to live differently. They no longer rush to fill silences or explain their hearts. They don't cling to promises or chase after certainty. Instead, they rest in the simplicity of being. They can stand in the presence of another and feel completely full, even if no words are spoken, even if nothing happens. Their very existence becomes a quiet declaration. I am love, and that is enough. This serenity radiates from them effortlessly, touching everyone they meet, even if those people don't understand why they feel calmer in their presence. The awakened see love as a cosmic rhythm, a pulse that flows through everything. They no longer judge its arrival or departure, for they know both are part of the dance. Let's compare it to waves on the ocean. They rise and fall, yet the ocean remains unchanged. In the same way, the awakened experience relationships as waves, some short, some vast, some wild, some calm. But through them all, they remain the ocean, steady, still aware. They no longer mourn endings, because they know that nothing real ever ends. Eventually, the awakened begin to live as conduits of love rather than seekers of it. They give, not to be loved in return, but because giving is their nature. They forgive easily, they understand deeply, and they let go without bitterness. Their hearts become mirrors, reflecting love wherever they go. They no longer worry about being seen or understood, because they know that every misunderstanding, too, is love, playing another role in the eternal game of recognition. And when they look back on their journey, they smile. They see that the loneliness they once feared was never loneliness at all. It was the space love needed to expand. The solitude, the ache, the endless longing, all of it was preparation for the realization that love was never missing. It was them, waiting to be remembered. As Alan Watts would whisper with that knowing smile, "You are the universe pretending not to know itself," until one day, it falls in love and remembers. In the end, the awakened realized that love was never something to be found, but something to be seen. Every longing, every heartbreak, every fleeting connection was simply life whispering the same truth. That love was never between two beings. It was within all things. Alan Watts often said that awakening is not about discovering something new, but remembering what has always been true. And when this remembrance takes root, the need to search disappears. Love stops being a destination and becomes the very air they breathe. What once felt like loneliness now becomes serenity. The silence that used to ache transforms into a sacred presence, a quiet knowing that everything, even the empty spaces, is held by love. The awakened begin to live not as seekers, but as expressions of the infinite itself. Every smile, every tear, every goodbye carries a new tenderness, because they finally see that there was never separation to begin with. Love was never missing. It was only hidden behind the illusion of I and you. This realization doesn't strip life of meaning, it deepens it. Relationships, friendships, even moments of solitude become luminous with understanding. To love after awakening is to walk through the world gently, knowing that every being you meet is another form of yourself. Watts would say, "You are the universe looking at itself through billions of eyes." And in that awareness, love stops being a pursuit and becomes participation, the pure joy of existence meeting itself again and again. Perhaps that is the final irony. The awakened cannot find love because they have become it. The ocean cannot find water, nor can fire find heat. Once consciousness sees itself fully, the search ends, and what remains is peace, vast, radiant, and quietly eternal. The awakened no longer ask to be loved. They become a living embodiment of love itself, extending it without effort, without boundary, without end. If this message has touched something within you, if, for a moment, you've felt the quiet truth that Alan Watts spoke of, take a breath and let it settle. You are not alone in your longing. Your very longing is love remembering itself. If this reflection resonated with you, stay connected with this space. Subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and help spread this awareness. Because somewhere, someone else is awakening, and your presence might be the love they've been searching for all along.